how my destiny's drawn. Just when the story is shifting, turns out it's too good to last. Maybe I just can't escape from the past as I go chasing the dawn. Why don't you just release me and go your separate way? My heart has nothing left to give away. Another drink for my troubles, another cold cigarette. I'm not the type, but I'll take a bet that flame will keep burning on as I go chasing the dawn, as I go chasing the dawn, as I go chasing the dawn. Another stroll in the shadows, one more familiar street. It seems that history is bound to repeat. That's how my destiny's drawn. Just when the story is shifting, turns out it's too good to last. Maybe I just can't escape from the past as I go chasing the dawn. Why don't you just release me and go your separate way? My heart.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Kinetic Action, Episode 4. I apologize for not using the camera today. I think that's what's been making the stream glitch out a little bit, and I'm working on a solution, but I didn't want to risk it on this one because this is a very fun day we're going to have. Just a reminder, you can still contact me through Patreon. You can support my work at Substack, or you can come onto my Twitter and give any comments that you would like. I also have other places where you can find my work, or if you have a question, you can directly super chat it to me and I'll be happy to address it. Today, we're going to go through Bryant McCall's essay. It's a little long, but I find it very interesting in what we've been talking about with the current subsection 224 of the National Defense Authorization Act, which has been decried by the enemies of America, I might say, as being an Israeli takeover of the American military, which is just complete bullshit. But the loudest voice, other than Alex Jones, who nobody cares about in the first place, the loudest voice against all of this has been Joe Kent. And I think it's important to understand that he wrote and is now a staff writer for Responsible Statecraft, which is the Quincy Institute's main organ of propaganda. The Quincy Institute being funded by George Soros and the Koch brothers, and by the Iranian American Institute, which is responsible for the Obama Joint Protocol of Action. So let's get right into reading it. And I'll try to make comments as I go through. But Joe Kent had written a article for Direct Statecraft where he says, it was entitled, Why U.S.-Israel Integration is Far from America First, right? So let's get into it because it's actually incredibly interesting. A direct rebuttal to Joe Kent and to Responsible Statecraft, the online magazine of the Quincy Institute, on why U.S.-Israel integration is far from America first, misclassifies the body it claims to defend, indicts its own author, and reads a pre-Silicon map in the Pax Silica era. America alone is America last, which is by far one of my favorite expressions I've heard in a long time. Joe Kent's newest brief for responsible statecraft demands more than a rebuttal. It demands a reckoning. The thesis commits a category error of civilizational magnitude. It frames the deepening U.S.-Israel defense technology integration embodied in Section 224 as the outsourcing of national security to an extrinsic vendor, when no such membrane exists to outsource across. You cannot outsource to yourself. What Kent misclassifies as perilous entanglement is, read correctly, the consolidation of a distributed civilizational organism whose demographic, scientific, financial, and silicon substrate nodes already span both shores. Separation is therefore not prudent procurement, but self-amputation. So what he's saying is that this already exists, and that's the argument that me and many other people have made. The integration and the partnerships between Israel and America already exist. They already exist between Israel and America. They already exist between other countries and America, such as Five Eyes, such as NATO, such as a whole bunch of different groups. And if you're going to make the argument that it should be gotten rid of, you have to make the argument based on sound reasoning. Otherwise, it's just self-amputation. You're literally cutting off your nose to spite your face, to use a overplayed idiom. Kent ascended from Tier 1 operator to Director of National Counterterrorism Center before resigning over the Iran war. He now publishes under the masthead of an institution seated by the very financier archetypes his own movement spent a decade decrying, there to argue that Israel remains a foreign nation whose interests diverge and whose capabilities must be walled off. This is no policy disagreement. It's a foundational misreading of the Pax Silica substrate. The ally forged across American and Israeli laboratories, from the Mellanox interconnects that make NVIDIA's frontier compute clusters computable at all, to the co-production lines already metabolizing Tamir interceptors and trophy systems on U.S. soil. The reply forest's reflexive question on who funds whom misses the merit entirely. The argument collapses at its own premise. With no need to litigate anyone's motives, we are not outsourcing America's security to a stranger. We are consolidating a civilization that already spans both shores. 85% of world Jewry anchored in the United States and Israel. The shared forge of the nuclear deterrent, the nation's cultural anthems, its venture metabolism, and the hardware nervous system of machine intelligence. What follows takes the brief apart at the joints. Its unargued extrinsic ontology is empirical obsolescence about the integration long since a fait accompli. Its internal contradictions on jobs and autarky, and its pre-silicon ledger blind to the coalition compute supremacy on which primacy in the silicon era now turns, which is a very cool way of saying that the integrations that are taking place on a technological level are there, and they're civilizational in nature, in terms of, if we're going to keep America first, if we're going to make America advance, if we're going to take advantage of the technologies that are going to define the future, they're already in existence. And to now start saying that the best thing we could do is cut those off is patently ridiculous, but also very harmful. In their place stands the replacement frame, America first as the indispensable hub of an irreducible democratic technology bloc, not a fortress severed from its own extensions. So understood, integration is not subsidy but self-defense, continuity maintenance, and the unkillable leverage of occupying the highest node in a network no rival can exit. Kent's America alone is, by demonstrated historical and emerging computational logic, America last. The alloy cannot be unmade. The only open question is whether strategic reasoning will metabolize the reality already declared in state language on both sides of the ocean. Part 1. The self-demotion. There's a particular kind of fall that looks from the outsides like a series of lateral moves. Joe Kent enlisted at 17, qualified into the Ranger and Special Forces pipelines, was selected into a Tier 1 Special Missions Unit inside JSOC, ran 11 combat deployments, retired with 6 Bronze Stars, and then carried the operator credential into CIA Ground Branch, the covert action arm that runs the most sensitive paramilitary network the agency owns. In July 2025, the Senate confirmed him as Director of National Counterterrorism Center. the apex node of all source intelligence fusion in the United States, the desk that integrates every threat stream the Republic can see and feeds the language of the presidential threat assessment. There's no higher altitude in the counterterrorism profession. He sat at the precise convergence point where Iranian proxy orchestration, nuclear latency indicators, and the live architecture of the U.S.-Israel organism arrived in classified detail every single morning. In structural terms, he held the best seat on Earth from which to understand what is actually being built. Then in March 2026, he resigned it, walking away from the desk over the Iran war, a departure reported by Reuters and across the wire. On June 3, 2026, that same man published his first article for our Statecraft, which is Responsible Statecraft, the online magazine of the Quincy Institute. Read the phrase twice because it contains the entire story. The director of the National Counterterrorism Center has become a freelance contributor, byline soliciting slot, tips, pitches, and ideas at the house organ of the Quincy Institute, a restraint shop seeded with money from the very globalist financier archetype his own movement spent a decade demonizing, whose executive vice president co-founded the most prominent Iran advocacy organization in Washington. This is not a career pivot. It's a self-demotion of almost surgical completeness. From the apex of American intelligence fusion to a contributor masthead whose institutional purpose is to argue that the threats he once briefed are overblown. From the all-source product to a public opinion poll as the opening strategic input. From the desk that tells the presidents what's coming to the magazine that exists to insist that nothing is. And the argument he brought down with him is worse than the dissent. Strip the prose, and the thesis reduces to a single unargued sentence. We cannot outsource components of our national security to nations that do not share our interests. And that sentence is not a finding. It's a premise wearing the costume of a conclusion. And the premise is precisely the matter in dispute. Everything in the article inherits its force from the axiom Kent never defends because he cannot see that he is holding it. That Israel is intrinsic to the American body, a foreign vendor to whom capability is outsourced, rather than what it actually is, which is a node in a distributed continuously circuit that the United States does not so much ally with as contain. Name the axiom and the building falls, because you cannot outsource to yourself. And what Ken has misfiled as prudent procurement policy is correctly classified an autoimmune event, the immune system of a civilization mistaking native tissue for an intruder and recommending the knife. This is the case. This reply will prove 4 ways: that his framework misclassifies the relationship it analyzes, that it is empirically obsolete about an integration that already exists, that it cannibalizes its own premises, and that it is reading a pre-silicon map in the era that has already rendered that map void. Each failure is independently disqualifying. Together they describe an argument that should not have survived editorial review at an institution that takes itself seriously. Part 2. The word outsourcing is the tell. Every consequential error in the piece is downstream of one diction choice. Ken says outsource. He means foreign nation. He says foreign nation. He says do not share our interests and will put their interests first every time. This is the grammar of a transaction between strangers, a procurement officer warning against a vendor with divergent incentives. It presupposes a clean membrane, America on one side, Israel on the other, a contract spanning the gap, and the entire force of the article comes from the presupposition, which is never argued, only assumed, because to state it plainly would be to expose it. The presupposition is false at the level of fact. 85% of the world's Jewish population lives in 2 countries, the United States and Israel. Pew's own demographic work establish it. There's 2 parties across a negotiable diplomatic gap. They are nodes in a shared continuity circuit, whose families, capital networks, universities, laboratories, and professional institutions interlock at depths that make disentanglement not a foreign policy adjustment, but an internal rupture. The American nuclear deterrent that kept the Soviets out of Western Europe for 40 years was an ally product, engineered overwhelmingly by Jewish scientists who were themselves European refuse. Oppenheimer directing, Teller, César, von Neumann, Beeth, Feynman doing the physics. The songs the country sings to celebrate itself as Christian and eternal, God Bless America, White Christmas, were written by a Russian Jewish refugee named Israel Belin. the Heritage Foundation, the institutional spine of American conservatism, and the author of the National Strategy Against Anti-Semitism, runs that strategy at its most consequential active project. There is no membrane to cross. What is lazily called Jewish influence is, in the American case, inseparable from the American scientific, cultural, financial, legal, and technological formation. The forge already happened, and an alloy does not separate back into ore. This is why Kent's central word is a category error, not merely a loaded one. Outsourcing describes sending a function outside the body. Integration with Israel sends nothing outside the body because the relevant body, the distributed civilizational organism that produces the bombs, the songs, the venture metabolism, and the cyber industry, already spans both states. Kent is running a foreign policy model on what is structurally a domestic continuity question. And a model applied to the wrong ontological class will produce confident, well-formatted nonsense, no matter how carefully its internal steps are executed. He's not wrong about the trade-offs of integration. He's wrong about what kind of integration it is. He has diagnosed an organ consolidation as an annexation by a stranger and prescribed amputation as hygiene. Hold that distinction because it determines the reading of everything that follows. If Israel is intrinsic, fusion looks like capture, subsidy, and entanglement. Kent's entire vocabulary. If Israel is intrinsic, fusion looks like self-defense, continuity maintenance, and home system consolidation. The argument over Section 224 is not really an argument over a Pentagon procurement provision. It's an argument which of those two definitions of America one inhabits. And Kent has simply assumed the first without noticing that it is the whole question. Then spent 1,500 words deriving conclusions from an assumption he was obligated to defend and never touched. So again, what are we saying here? What we're saying is that the integration and partnerships that exist between Israel and America, especially at a defense and technological and machine learning level, already exist. And that they're both developed with joint progress in mind and joint interests in mind. And even if both countries have interests that diverge at times, what everyone is really overlooking is the fact that both countries are making these systems for the benefit of each other, and that both of them are going to be that way. And that what Joe Kent does is he first makes the assumption that both countries have divergent interests, and that making divergent interests, everything spans from there, where it's not healthy nor correct to assume that. Part 3, the integration he fears already exists. Set the ontology aside and grant Kent his own frame for the length of this section, because even on his own terms, the article fails as a matter of fact. Kent presents Section 224, the United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative, as the importation of something unprecedented and alarming. Israeli manufacturers operating production lines on American soil, data fusion, embedding inside the production of critical defense technologies, the transformation of Israel from a top U.S. aid recipient to a full member of the U.S. defense and intelligence apparatus. He writes as though a door is being opened for the first time. The door has been opened for decades, and a former director of the National Counterterrorism Center is the last person on Earth entitled to discover it late. The Tamir Interceptor, the round that Iron Dome fires, is already co-produced on American soil in Camden, Arkansas, through a Raytheon-Rafael joint venture, which American workers building Israeli-designed munitions for both nations. The Trophy Active Protection System, a Rafael design, rides on United States Army Abrams tanks right now, intercepting incoming rounds with Israeli sensors and Israeli counter-munitions bolted onto America's primary main battle tank. Arrow 3, David Sling, and Iron Dome are not Israeli systems the United States observes from a distance. They are jointly developed and jointly funded programs, threaded through Boeing, Raytheon, and the Missile Defense Agency, in which American and Israeli engineering are already a single design lineage. A U.S.-operated radar facility sits in the Negev, staffed by American personnel on Israeli soil, feeding the integrated missile defense picture. The unprecedented co-production Kent warns Section 224 will dangerously create is a fait accompli he is encountering as if it were a proposal. Section 224 does not open the door. It codifies, rationalizes, and loan balances an organism that is metabolized as one body since before Kent earns its first Bronze Star. Then there is the richest detail of the entire piece, the one that should end the conversation among serious readers. Kent recoils at data fusion. He treats the phrase as a euphemism for capture. But Joe Kent ran the National Counterterrorism Center, and the National Counterterrorism Center is the institutional answer to a fusion failure. It was created because the 9/11 Commission found that the United States had been fatally unable to fuse intelligence across its own agencies and its allies. NCTC exists as a matter of founding charter to be the place where all source data is fused. The man whose entire job was the fusion of intelligence is now warning the public that fusion was the closest non-Five Eyes partner on the planet is a vector of foreign subversion. He has not made a strategic argument. He has repudiated the founding rationale of the agency he led and hoped no one would notice the contradiction sitting at the center of his own resume. He compounds it with a confession he does not appear to recognize as one. Our increasing over-reliance on Israeli intelligence, he writes, has caused our own capabilities to atrophy. Pause on what a former NCTC director has just admitted, that the American intelligence apparatus he recently led has degraded. His remedy is to sever the input that compensates for the degradation rather than repair the degradation. To cut off the transfusion between the patient has grown reliant on while still bleeding, and the admission raises a question he does not want asked. If American capabilities atrophied, on whose watch and in whose lane did the atrophy occur? He has indicated to his own institution and then he has indicted his own institution and then prescribed an amputation as the cure for the wound he has just disclosed, which I think speaks for itself. So I'm going to keep going. And I want to remind everybody to follow Bryant McGill. His writing is fantastic. Sometimes it's a bit wordy, like it requires you to actually think, but it's fantastic. So, part 4, the autarky heresy. The tweet that launched the article is more honest than the article, and it self-destructs in 11 words. Intertwining our defense technological development with the Israelis or any foreign nation is foolish and dangerous. That universal quantifier, or any foreign nation, is the analytical kill zone, because the principle, applied with consistency Kent demands of everyone else, would have aborted every flagship American weapons program in the modern era. The F-35 is co-developed across 8 partner nations. The United Kingdom builds roughly 15% of every airframe. The Israeli F-35I Adir runs indigenous Israeli command and control and electronic warfare systems that improve the most advanced fighter the United States has ever flown. AUKUS Pillar 2, the joint development of artificial intelligence, hypersonics, quantum sensing, and electronic warfare with Australia and the United Kingdom, is by any honest accounting the most consequential alliance technology architecture the United States is building in this decade, and its co-development with foreigners by design and by name. Five Eyes is co-developed intelligence fusion, the spine of Western signals intelligence, for 70 years. I'm sorry, I just laughed at you, Dees. Kent's principle does not describe America first. It describes America alone. And America alone is a matter of demonstrated history, a strictly weaker America, because no nation, including the United States, has ever built its frontier capabilities in autarky, and the ones that tried lost. He has committed himself in public under his own name to a doctrine incompatible with the actual existing successful posture of the force he claims to defend. Either he does not know this, which is disqualifying for a former NCTC director, or he knows it and elided it, which is worse. The backdoors and spyware will most certainly be used by the Israelis. Line belongs to the same logical family and dies the same death. It's asserted with certainty and zero tradecraft specificity by a man of all people who of all people should be able to describe the security architecture that governs Allied co-production. And it proves far too much. If a partner could insert a backdoor is a reason to refuse co-development, then it is a reason to refuse co-development with the United Kingdom, with Australia, and with every node in Five Eyes, with every supplier in the F-35 consortium. The argument is not a security finding. It's a double standard wearing a security costume. And the costume slips the moment you apply the axiom evenly, which Kent conspicuously declines to do, because applied evenly it would forbid the alliances on which American primacy actually exists. The argument that cannibalizes itself. Dees, I know it is very wordy. I'm saying, like, I happen to appreciate when people take the time to explain everything that they're saying, but I understand that other people would like things that are more to the point, which is kind of why I'm reading it for everyone. So it's not just the headline that everybody sees. This is actually quite brilliant. And it explains everything that people like me spend dozens of shows trying to explain to people. And then what we lead to is a lot more questions. And this is answering those questions. Why I decided to do a show on it today. By the way, tomorrow's show is going to deal with the Israeli-Iran-Lebanon conflict. So I hope everybody's ready for that. And I should have the camera working by then. So I hope everyone's looking forward to it tomorrow at 10 a.m. Part 5, the argument that cannibalizes itself. An argument can survive being wrong about ontology and wrong about facts if it is at least internally coherent. Kant is not. It eats its own premises in plain sight. He argues that the claim defense spending recycles into American jobs is a fallacy used to launder aid, and then 2 paragraphs later treats Israeli co-production creating American jobs as a dangerous, powerful talking point that will give Israel leverage with many members of Congress and the American public. He cannot have it both ways. Either domestic defense manufacturing creates real jobs, in which case Israeli co-production on American soil is a net benefit by his own logic, or it does not, in which case his own proposed remedy, invest the $30.8 billion directly on weapon systems for our own inventories, fails to produce the jobs he implies American production yields. The contradiction is not subtle. It is 2 adjacent paragraphs holding opposite positions on the identical proposition, deployed opportunistically depending on which one wounds Israel in the sentence at hand. He then reaches for Trump's complaint about defense center stock buybacks to indict Section 224. And the evidence detonates in his hand because buybacks are a pathology of the incumbent American primes of Lockheed and RTX and Boeing, not of foreign co-producers. Introducing competitive Israeli co-production would pressure exactly the buyback-bloated contractors Ken is gesturing at. His own cited grievance argues for the integration he opposes. And then comes the tell that dissolves the America First branding entirely. Ken attacks the Huckabee reframing, the shift from universal aid outlays toward trade and reciprocal co-production, as deceptive public relations. But the substance of that shift is precisely the maturation from dependency to integration that a sincere sovereignty hawk should celebrate, because it ends the handout Kent claims to despise. He opposes aids because it's a handout. He opposes trade because it's entanglement. Subtract both, and exactly one option remains standing: severance. That is the revealed preference beneath the patriotic vocabulary, not putting America first, but decoupling as a terminal value. And decoupling is, with mechanical reliability, the single outcome the adversary most wants, because Tehran cannot defeat the fused organism kinetically, and can only hope to watch it disintegrate itself voluntarily. The conclusion Kent reaches, and the outcome Tehran most desires, are the same point: voluntary disaggregation. And an analysis that terminates precisely on the adversary's optimum has failed its own terms, whatever its author intends and however he arrived there. Which brings us to how the article opens, and the deepest professional indictment in it. Kent's first move is a public opinion poll. Israel is losing American sentiment. A Pew number has moved. Therefore, the aid is in jeopardy, and the architecture should be reconsidered. A counterterrorism professional, above all others, is trained to recognize when the information environment is being shaped by an adversary's narrative campaign. And Ken has instead taken the output of that shaping as ground truth and converted it into a thesis of capitulation. He has mistaken the enemy's narrative deliverable for a strategic finding. This is not analysis. It's letting the adversary set your force posture by polling, authored by a man whose entire profession was supposed to be detecting that exact maneuver, and who is now formally employed producing more of the deliverable he mistook for data. And the timing completes the diagnosis. The brief is dated June 3rd, 2026, barely 48 hours after a leaked, expletive-laden phone call in which the president reportedly told the Israeli prime minister he was effing crazy, that he would be in prison without American cover, and that everybody hates Israel because of this. A leak that the commentariat instantly metabolized as the long-prophesized rupture between Washington and Jerusalem. Kent surfed the wave. His opening paragraph rides the identical current, a sentiment through red as a structural break. But the structure was moving the other way. As I argued in What Netanyahu Trump Call Reveals About the Empire and the New Order, the call was not Washington severing Jerusalem. It was the American presidency slipping a far older leash. The U.S.-Israel substrate consolidating beneath the noise, while the figure actually being told the arrangement is over sits in London, not Tel Aviv. Kent timed a decoupling thesis to a 48-hour misreading of a news cycle and filed it as a strategic judgment. Twice in one article. Then the counterterrorism professional whose whole craft was telling an adversary-amplified information spasm from a tectonic shift mistook the foam for the tide, once with the pole, once with the leak. Part 5. The pre-Silicon map. Even granting Kent every point, even if integration was outsourcing, even if Section 224 were novel, even if his argument were coherent, the framework would still be obsolete, because it's built on a model of national power that the present decade has already retired. Kent is running on a 1985 cost accounting ledger, Kinetic platforms, made in the USA, national defense industrial bases, the question of whether the taxpayer gets the $3.8 billion back in jobs. It's a competent ledger for the world it was built for, but it contains no variable for the axis that now determines the outcome. Compute, frontier artificial intelligence, semiconductor fabrication, the silicon substrate on which every other instrument of power, Kinetic platforms included, now runs. On that axis, Israel is not a recipient to be audited. It is a forward research and development node of the first rank. And on the single most decisive layer of the stack, it is not merely a contributor, but the origin. A frontier model is a set of weights, and the weights are American and global, but weights are inert until they are computed at scale, and computing them at scale means lashing tens of thousands of processors into one coherent organism. That fabric, the interconnect, is in its lineage Israeli. NVIDIA's entire networking spine descends from Mellanox, the Israeli company it acquired for roughly $6.9 billion, whose successors, InfiniBand and Spectrum-X, are, in NVIDIA's own chief executive's words, the reason the company built its network business, a division now running at a 25 to 30 billion annual rate, and by NVIDIA's own reporting, the fastest growing major unit inside the most valuable company in history. NVIDIA's Israeli-built supercomputer, Israel One, became the blueprint for Colossus, the largest private AI training cluster in the West. The company is now erecting what will be Israel's largest technology campus in the north. Layer in Intel Haifa's design centers, which authored the microarchitectures that repeatedly rescued the firm that anchored American computing, Mobileye, commanding the edge AI and autonomy frontier, and the alumni of Unit 8200, who built a disproportionate share of the planet's cybersecurity industry. There is a precise and defensible sense in which the deepest hardware layer of machine intelligence is Israeli in its soul. Not the weights, but the fabric that makes the weights computable at all. That is the layer Kent's ledger has no column for, and the layer he proposes to wall off behind restrict the development of key technologies to Americans only. The real contest of the century is a substrate supremacy race against a billion-scale authoritarian competitor, and its decisive fact is that no single nation, the United States emphatically included, can sustain the full stack alone. ASML's extreme ultraviolet lithography is Dutch, and the most advanced fabrication is Taiwanese. The frontier labs and hyperscale compute are American. The disproportionate density of cyber and chip design genius is Israeli. The demographic talent scale engine is Indian. The frontier is inherently and irreducibly a coalition, and to amputate the Israeli interconnect layer in the name of self-reliance is not patriotism. It is unilateral disarmament, misfiled as patriotism. A proposal to fight a coalition war by firing the node that builds your nervous system. This is the terminal form of the indictment running through the entire reply. Not that Kent arrives at a debatable conclusion, but that a man who held the apex intelligence desk in the United States cannot perceive the stratum on which the civilizational contest is actually being decided, and has published, under his own name, a thesis that would sever the fabric of American AI primacy and called the cut America First. This is the architecture that the United States and Israel made explicit in state language on January 16, 2026, when both governments launched a strategic partnership on artificial intelligence, research, and critical technologies, declaring the integration of Israel's research ecosystem as a secure node and naming the cooperation pillars across artificial intelligence, semiconductors, space, robotics, material science, and energy. The informal organism became declared architecture. Section 224 is simply the defense protection limb of the same body. Kent is not warning against the scheme, but he's arguing with a published treaty of the future. holding a map drawn before the territory existed and insisting the territory is the error. And here is the inversion that ends the thesis. The one move that takes Kent's own banner and runs it up the opposite mast. Properly understood, America First requires integration because the only available path to durable American primacy runs through coalition compute supremacy, through being the indispensable hub of the democratic technology bloc rather than a self-sufficient fortress that does not and cannot exist. Sovereignty in the Silicon era is not autarky. It's the occupying the highest leverage node in a coalition you cannot exit, and neither can your rivals. The fortress is besieged and starved. The hub is unlikable because everything roots through it. Ken has confused insulation with strength and dependency with leverage. When in a hub and spoke architecture, the hub derives its sovereignty from having spokes, not despite them. His doctrine implemented does not deliver America First. It severs the United States from the network that makes American primacy possible. And the honest name for what that outcome is the title of this essay. America Alone is America Last. Part 5. A word to the Quincy Institute. This section is the one the reply forest cannot write. Because the reply forest is too busy asking who is paying Joe Kent. That question is beneath the subject, and worse, it is a gift to him. Because it's answerable in one line and converts an indefensible argument into a sympathy story about a smeared veteran. So it sets down entirely. The case against this publication decision has nothing to do with anyone's compensation and everything to do with analytical quality. As stated that way, it is unanswerable. What is documented, and what the Quincy Institute states openly, is the shape of the house, seated by George Soros's Open Society Foundation and Charles Koch's network alike, with Trita Parsi, co-founder of the National Iranian American Council, as its executive vice president, and a masthead whose declared mission is restraint. None of that is conspiracy. It's a tax filing. It's an about page. The legitimate observation is not the funding corrupts the author. It is the revealed preference incoherence. A self-described anti-globalist, anti-deep state, America First figure has chosen to launder an anti-integration argument through the institutional vehicle of the very globalist financier archetype his movement built its identity demonizing. Edited by the capital's foremost advocate of Iranian détente. In service of the one geopolitical outcome, U.S.-Israel decoupling, that most reliably advantages Tehran. You need no corruption for that to land. The incoherence is the indictment, and is fully sourced. But the deeper reason the editorial decision deserves a second look is the one this essay has spent 6 sections establishing. The Quincy Institute published itself as a serious realist shop, and realism has a proud and necessary tradition of skepticism towards alliance entanglement and toward the political economy of the defense sector, a tradition that, deployed rigorously, is a genuine contribution to American statecraft. This article is not that. It's an article it's an argument that misclassifies the relationship it analyzes at the level of basic ontology. That is factually obsolete about an integration already a generation old. That contradicts itself above adjacent paragraph, that lets adversary-shaped sentiment polling set strategic posture, and that contains no variable for the technological axis on which the entire contest now turns. An institution that prints this under a marquee resume is not advancing the straight tradition. It is spending the credibility of that tradition to lend a strategic error an authority it has not earned on its merits. The serious people at Quincy know the difference between Kennan and a capitulation memo. This is the letter wearing the former's coat, and it's fair to ask whether the imprimatur was extended to the analysis or merely the author's biography. Section 7. From the Presidential Threat Assessment to the Quincy Institute. And then we're almost done, guys. Return to where we began, because the arc is the argument. A man who once held the desk that tells the President of the United States what is coming now solicits pitches from a restraint magazine and opens his debut with a poll. A man whose profession was the fusion of intelligence now warns the public against fusion. A man who spent a career hunting the adversary this architecture exists to defeat now advances the one conclusion that adversary most needs, the West to adopt. The resume that once authenticated his judgment now does the work his analysis cannot, lending a strategically self-defeating thesis the authority of a marquee counterterrorism career and that borrowed authority is being spent retail, one byline at a time, at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He had the best seat on earth from which to read the map. He is reading a pre-Silicon map anyway, and selling the misreading to an institution that should know better. The architecture he is arguing against is not a proposal to be debated. It is Pax Silica, already declared in state language, already metabolizing as one body across two states that hold 85% of the world's Jewish population. Already the substrate on which the West's survival in the contest with authoritarian scale will be decided. It does not require Joe Kent's permission, and it will not be stopped by his nostalgia. The ally cannot go back. It was forged, it walked out of the furnace harder than any component, and it is categorically empirically impossible to reabsorb into the smaller, weaker fortress, America, that Kent mistakes for the strong one. We are not outsourcing America's security to a stranger. We are consolidating a civilization that already spans both shores. This is not far from America First. It's the only version of America First that survives contact with the century. Everything else is America alone, and America alone is America last. So, I wonder if Ken had Ian proofread his essay for him. That's actually quite funny. Again, when we're looking at the advantage of the United States, and I'm not claiming that the United States is perfect, not by far, okay? So, that being said, the only way that America survives in a state that it currently exists, a state that can spend the amount of money it does on defense, the state that can influence world politics, the state that can defend global shipping, the only way America maintains that edge is through technology-based partnerships that allow for American primacy. It allows for America to have the best technology deployed around the world and usable at all times. And again, as he mentioned, we have lost the ability to do so internally a long time ago. We made a strategic decision that it wasn't worth it. And if you go all the way back, like what did we do? And I believe it was called Operation Paperclip. After World War II, we took all of the defeated Nazis and brought their scientists here to work on our defense programs. That's where the B-2 comes from. It's where a lot of different things that we've created come from. We've made deals with people that we wouldn't consider the best people on earth in order to create intelligence infrastructure that has serviced us throughout the years. People love to point of the failure of 9/11 and the fact that they were able to hit us and kill 3,000 Americans. But what has to be more observed is that since 9/11, which is now 25 years ago, there hasn't been another major attack. We've been able to starve off every possible attack vector that exists on the planet to create a mass terror attack. And I know people love to get really scary and talk about sleeper cells and groups that are looking to commit another 9/11. That all may be true, but as of this moment, they have not been able to. And that's not just a fact based on American warcraft. It's based on American law enforcement, American intelligence, American international relations, and international warcraft. And it's the one place where you can look at Iraq and Afghanistan and say that they were a success, is that even though the outcomes weren't the best that we could have hoped for, America still spent the time and money to stay in those places for an extended period of time and use that time to defeat ISIS, to kill Osama bin Laden, and to do many other different things. So, yes, can we sit back and say that sitting in Iraq and Afghanistan and spending trillions of dollars was probably a waste? I wouldn't say it was a complete waste. I would say that it probably was bad policy at some point. That over the years that we were there, the different politicians that got their hands on that policy probably failed us in many different ways. Obama and Biden. But as of right now, if we don't establish the absolute best military and intelligence sources and operational architectures to create the best systems in the world, we will be alone and we will be last. And we see what happens when America is alone. Every time America has taken a distinctly isolationist and withdraws from world stage posture, we lose hundreds of thousands of lives. Staying out of World War II probably cost the world 80 million people, right? And the idea that we're just going to survive based on only caring about what happens between our two coasts is probably foolish. I'm going to run, and I will see everyone tomorrow. I will be talking about the Iran, Israel, Lebanon, USA conflict and what occurred over the weekend. I'll have more information because I'm still trying to figure a couple things out. Follow me at my Twitter at RealHalseyE, or you can find me on Substack or Patreon. All links are in the description. And file Bryant McGill. He's a Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author. He's the founder of Simple Reminders, a United Nations appointed global champion and congressionally recognized ambassador of goodwill. He's the one who wrote this article today. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to send them to me and I'd be happy to answer them. Have an absolutely great day, everybody.